Well, we have a busy afternoon planned for us still, so why don't we go ahead and get started here right on time. Uh, Thank you all for coming and participating in Scholar Day. I've been so impressed by what I've seen, and the conversation that I've gotten to overhear while we're starting to eat our lunches has been overwhelmingly positive. So thank you. We've got plenty more in store for the rest of the day. So at this point, I just invite you to continue eating your lunches, sit back, get off your feet, relax. Let's listen to two absolutely excellent speakers that are on the itinerary for this lunch. I'm going to quickly, by the way, my name is Dr. Nate Sammons. I'm the chair of the biological sciences, and I'm here. I get the honor of introducing the two speakers in this room today. The first I'm going to introduce to you is Dr. Holly Wilson. She is the chair of Arts, English, and Humanities and the interim chair of History and Political Sciences. She's had a very busy year this year. She grew up in Illinois and Florida. She considers herself a Kant scholar, and we will be learning what that means in just a moment. And she has published 2 books and many articles using the philosopher Immanuel Kant to help understand current issues like environmental ethics, marriage, and teaching. She's going to share her story about how she became a scholar and how her scholarship opens you to the world and creates a sense of community. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Holly Wilson.
Well, thank you, Nate. And I want to thank Dr. Rowan and Sandy Gilliland, Dr. Gilliland, for inviting me to put together a presentation on Scholar Day. And I hope they're going to be pleased. I hope you're going to be pleased. My main purpose is to inspire you to want to become a scholar. So I'm going to tell you my story of how I became a scholar, and I hope it inspires you. So growing up, I was going to be a psychologist. I don't know why I chose this profession, but it was something I'd heard of and it sounded great. I had never heard of being a scholar, so that never crossed my mind. I didn't know any scholars, and you don't really hear about scholars as a profession like you hear about doctors, lawyers, and psychologists. But the moment I was introduced to scholarship, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It all happened because of experiences I had in high school at Miami Senior High. To back up a bit, I have to mention an obstacle I had to overcome. I was put in a Catholic girls' home in high school. My home environment with my stepmother was not safe for me, and my high school counselor, Mrs. Ellen Pease, got involved and arranged for me to be taken out of the home and placed in a girls' home. And then, or it first was a children's home and then a girls' home. This, you can imagine, was a devastating experience. I felt grief and loss and shame. I used to run from the bus so my friends wouldn't see me, and they wouldn't know that I came from the children's home. But no one seemed to know or hold it against me, and I still got into beta club, played sports. My friends affirmed me, and when we won the basketball tournament with my help, they carried me on their shoulders. So that all that shame healed. But something else happened to me that was unexpected. I felt free. Suddenly, I had no family obligations, and I was free from the sadness and fear I had lived in. And Mrs. Pease told me about a summer program in Israel that I could go to in high school. I didn't have any money, but Mrs. Pease went to the Miami Jewish Federation, and they paid my way. I was the only Gentile on the trip. Yep, and I earned high school credit for studying Jewish history on a kibbutz. And I can tell you just a little story. We ate cucumbers and tomatoes for breakfast because that's what they serve on kibbutz. And we studied Jewish history. So one day on the kibbutz, I asked the rabbi to help me learn more about Judaism. He recommended that I read a book called The Chosen by Chaim Potok. And it's about 2 boys, one Orthodox and one conservative. And they were both studying Torah and Talmud. And they became friends. There's a great deal of interesting cultural interpersonal and religious events in the book, but there was one thing that stood out in my mind, and that was the scholarship they engaged in. That's what caught my attention. So what they were engaged in is studying Torah, which is the Old Testament for Christians, and Talmud, which is a compendium of interpretation of Torah. And the rabbis would read and interpret a passage, and then in community, they would argue about what the passage meant and how rabbis had interpreted the passage. The boys studied by themselves, but then everyone came together to discuss it. It was a lonely activity, but also a community activity. Together, they were attempting to understand something that was a little bit difficult, but not so difficult they couldn't make progress. It was historical, and tradition played a role. This kind of scholarship goes back a long time, and they've been engaging in it for centuries. So they were learning how to engage in a type of scholarship that went back probably 20 centuries. So the very first time I learned about this form of scholarship, I knew I wanted to study Talmud and Torah. This was the kind of thing I knew I could dedicate my life to. Then suddenly I remembered I was not Jewish. Not only that, I realized I was not a man. In the Chosen, women did not study Torah. They were in the home cooking and taking care of children. That was not something that interested me. So I didn't see a way forward for myself. Fortunately, that was not the only experience I had of scholarship in high school. Mr. Huffman from my high school sent me to the University of Miami for honors in science to work with Dr. Rod Wellens, an assistant professor of psychology. Dr. Wellens put me to work on an experiment, which I ran on facial expressions. It was my task to test subjects on whether they could recognize emotions correctly based on facial expressions. I then wrote up the experiment with graphs and narrative, and it was my first attempt at doing scholarship. We were not debating ideas and interpretations of century-old texts. I was trying to discover some new truth, like you were doing today. So that's the kind of scholarship you can put in writing and is not done orally in community until you have Scholar Day. But it was the kind of scholarship I could really do. So I was excited. Meanwhile, Mrs. Pease helped me pick out colleges, and one of them was Vanderbilt University. In addition, I applied to Duke and Emory. I had seen a picture of Duke's campus and fell in love with Duke. But I didn't get into Duke. So I was devastated. At church, I found out that Carlton Gass, a student 2 years ahead of me, was at Vanderbilt. And Dr. Wellens told me that Dr. Carol Izzard, the leading researcher in emotions and facial expressions, was at Vanderbilt. Then I decided to go to Vanderbilt because they gave me a larger scholarship. I wasn't into research too much yet. And the choice of Vanderbilt has made all the difference. To me, it was like being in heaven. My freshman year, I majored in psychology and managed to take Dr. Izzard's senior level emotions class. Then I was exposed to another type of scholarship that I had no idea of before. I was told I had to write a research paper. This meant going to the library. We didn't have internet back then. And searching the stacks of books for a topic worth writing about. And some of you are nodding, you remember that. There were so many books. It wasn't like Talmudic and Torah scholarship. I had to find a topic and find research to talk about, and I had to write about something no one else had done before. It had to be something new, and I couldn't plagiarize. So you have to come up with something new. So I don't remember how I found Lawrence Kohlberg, but he's a Harvard psychologist who was doing research on moral judgment. And it looked to me like he was associating moral judgment with emotions, because the first stage of moral judgment is fear of punishment. And I said, that's it. That's my link. I can write a research paper on emotions and this topic. So I won't go into the Heinz dilemma or what he did, but basically what I did with my paper was I decided that the 6 stages of moral judgment that Kohlberg identified, I hypothesized that they were also associated with emotions. So I said the 3rd stage is associated with shame, and the 6th stage, which is the highest stage of moral judgment, is associated with guilt. So then I submitted this paper, and I got a really good feedback from Dr. Izzard. He loved the paper and gave me an A and said it was great. And that was really encouraging, you know, and I've looked back at my papers from Vanderbilt, and when professors didn't encourage me, I just didn't go in that field because, you know, you need that encouragement. So, but the thing is that I didn't take an experimental psychology class after that paper and an encouragement, because sometimes that happens. Because what really interests me was how in the world was Lawrence Kohlberg making a distinction between high and low moral judgment. Because I had also taken a statistics class, and the statistics class told me that psychologists talk about bell curves, and they're outliers, and most of the people are in the middle of the bell curve, but there are outliers on each side. But that's not high and low. High and low are normative concepts. So I said, this is not what you do in psychology, normative things. You do descriptive terms in psychology. So I decided to go to philosophy, to take an ethics class, to find out why it was that Kohlberg was calling moral judgment the highest, or the moral law judgment as the highest stage of moral judgment. And so then I took Dr. Locke's ethics class. And so as you can see, I've got a question, and my questions keep changing as I get more research. And so I go to get answers, where I can get answers for my questions. So Dr. Locke introduced me to Immanuel Kant, and I call myself a Kant scholar today. The book that I read was his ethical philosophy, and in that book, he explains why the moral law is the highest form of moral judgment. And I was hooked. I couldn't believe it. Here it was, an explanation for my question. So I learned also that reading philosophy was a real challenge. It was hard, and there were different interpretations of original sources. This kind of scholarship was more like the scholarship I discovered in The Chosen. There wasn't just one book and everyone interpreted it, since there were many philosophers, but the scholarship process was similar in that you could read a text and then research different philosophers' interpretations of that text, and then you write what you think. So the other thing I discovered is that there's not a lot of women in philosophy, but there were women philosophers, and a good number of them were also scholars. So this was something I could do. Not only could I do it, women were doing it and doing it well. And in fact, the teaching assistant for my class, my ethics class, was a woman. And she introduced me to a book by Hans-Georg Gadamer called Truth and Method. And you may never hear of this again, but it's a fantastic book. And you know what it's about? It's about interpretation. And so I was excited to learn about this because then it was going to teach me what it was that Jewish scholars were doing when they were interpreting Talmud and Torah. And so I was exposed for the first time through a woman scholar to something that actually I would write on someday. And today, even today, informs what I think philosophy is about and interpretation. And what the whole college, what liberal arts are about is interpretation. So it was fantastic, and not only personally, but also philosophically, to discover this book. And then, so I was captivated by philosophy, and there was a problem. How was I going to learn everything I needed to learn from philosophy, psychology, and I was also studying religion? So I couldn't triple major and graduate from Vanderbilt in 3 years, or 4 years rather. So what I decided to do is create my own major. So I went to the associate dean of Vanderbilt University, and I asked him, I actually first talked to advisors in philosophy, psychology, and religion, and they helped me put together courses and put together a major. And it was just happenstance how I named it. I happened to run across a book in the used book called Philosophical Anthropology. And I said, that's it. That's what I want to call my major, Philosophical Anthropology. And believe it or not, they actually accepted my major. I think I'm the only person in the whole history of Vanderbilt University to graduate with studies in philosophical anthropology. But anyway, you know, I could tell you that there's lots of stories I can tell you about obstacles I had to overcome in grad school, and how actually it turned out Kant had a philosophical anthropology, and I didn't even know it until my professor made me read everything by Immanuel Kant that was in translation. And I discovered this philosophical anthropology and said, I got to write my dissertation on that. And I did. And, you know, the funny thing about it is, because I went to Germany, did the research in the library stacks there, I had information that nobody else had. And I was able to get my dissertation, rewrite it, and publish it as a book. And it was published by State University and New York Press, which you may not know, but I think is about the third best publisher after Cambridge and Oxford University Press. So those are the kind of things. And I can tell you now, how much time do I have left?
You slept 3 minutes.
Okay. So I just want to talk, I mean, there's so many stories I could tell you, but I want to just, you know, touch on the fact that, you know, not only did I become a scholar, okay, because I had questions that I was trying to figure out, but I also wanted to publish them. And this is something I was talking to some of you about today as I was going around to your projects, that this is a possibility for you too, that you can get your work published. Today, if you go to Google Scholar, you'll see my scholar citations. There's 331 citations to my work. That's something that can happen once you get published. Other scholars from all over the world read your work and cite you. And it creates a community. You know, that's the key thing. I want you to know there are people all over the world I'm in contact with who are interested in Kant like I am. If I just stayed here in Louisiana, there's only three Kantians in Louisiana who are interested, and I talk to them, but it's not enough. You know, I want that world, you know. And just another thing that happened is, like, an Italian scholar contacted me and asked me to write an article for his book because he had read my stuff and that I had published. So this is the next step for you. I want you to realize that you can be a scholar. It's not just something you do on Scholar Day. It's something you can do as a career. And it's also the next step for you is to learn how to get published. Is to take what you have done and find some audience for it and get it out there and then get those scholarly citations. So I hope that inspires you. And I just want to say that having talked to a number of you, I'm really, proud of you and amazed by your work. And just realize this is the first step. The next step is to take it up the next notch and get it published. And I'll be happy to talk to anybody if you want to talk about how to do that. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah, I'll be glad to take some questions.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
No, actually, I'm interested to know how well people interpret facial expressions.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
second question is when you're speaking about it, how often do you notice your audience's expression change?
Well, I was noticing the facial expressions and hopefully, hoping to try to keep the expression of interest. So yeah, the research that I did was comparing two different techniques for assessing whether people are good at recognizing the emotion that a person has on their facial expression. And I found out that Carol Izard's method was better. And it was actually quite effective at determining that. And that people are really good at recognizing emotions. But today, I would say, there's so much complexity in psychology and neuropsychology and neuroscience. And they have made a lot of progress in trying to identify what emotions are. And so you really have to do that kind of research too. But Dr. Wellens didn't publish my work. I was a little disappointed by that because it was nice. It was written out. I liked it. I still have it. But I can't say that I followed up with Dr. Izard. He left to go to another university after I had that class with him. So I didn't follow up in psychology. So that wasn't where my interest went. Yeah, but I think the facial expressions, Dr. Izard, Carol Izard is still a leading person that you need to look at. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, anything else? Yes.
There's really maybe a comment or two. I think it's really valuable to see that there are so many different paths to success and research and in learning and professional. You had wanted to go to Duke, that path wasn't available. There's another path, Vanderbilt. Just because you have a certain idea of how it's going to go in the future, you don't get locked into that. You're flexible and you adjust and you create success for yourself. Same thing with the discipline. You need to find out what you're really interested in, passionate about. And sometimes you don't quite find that for a while. Right? You put things together, create something new or almost new, philosophical anthropology. So that's wonderful. The other comment is about publishing, which sounds a little bit scary or intimidating, and it doesn't have to be at all. And I appreciate you bringing that up. Now that you have done and are continuing to do some research, you have something to say. You have something to contribute to what is sometimes called the great conversation, which is just people publishing and someone reacts to that. And it's like being in a classroom, different people adding on to what has recently been said. That's what scholarship is among university professors. But students can be part of that too. And I'll point out that LSUA just began its own undergraduate journal. And there will be an opportunity for you to submit something that you could get published in our journal. Not that this is the only option or alternative, but it's going to be one option. So you'll be hearing about that too. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, because I think it does help our students visualize possibilities for themselves.
Absolutely. You know, it's kind of shocking to think, you know, you're going to take the next step and how to get there. But you know, you take one step at a time. I didn't publish anything as an undergraduate. In my mentor in graduate school, my dissertation director kind of helped me, mentored me into publication. And so that networking kind of helped me kind of transition to that kind of thinking. So it can be done. Yeah. But those are more stories. So anything else? Okay.
Well, thank you again, Dr.
Yeah,
Wilson, and thank you
thank
for
you.
being our resident Kantian. And let's say I wanted to become a Kantian with you. How would that process begin?
You start a conversation.
Excellent. The next speaker we have is actually going to be coming in remote. Her name is Dr. Lowery. I'm going to go ahead and read her bio as I see her waving there as she's sharing her screen and getting set up. Dr. Yvette Lowery will be presenting today on minority faculty shortages. She has been an assistant professor for LSUA since March of 2020 and currently works in the RN to BSN program online and resides in sunny Florida. She's originally from California, so she's used to the nice weather. She's a bi-coastal professor. Dr. Lowery continues to work as an emergency nurse practitioner as needed in her local emergency room. She has been a nurse since 2005 and in advanced practice since 2015. She has been working and an advocate for the equal care of diverse populations and creating more awareness for the needs of diversity in nursing and educators in nursing education. She recently won the 2021 Community Award for Women's Healthcare and Wellness at the 68th Annual South Atlantic Regional Conference for the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which was just incorporated this month. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Lowery.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to reshare my screen in just a moment. I actually have a video that I would like for you to watch before I get started. And I'm going to pull that up here.
All rise.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and representing the RN to BSN program online. Hope you are enjoying your lunch. I wanted to start with that video just as an icebreaker to kind of get you in the mind frame of my presentation. To start, I'm actually a little nervous about presenting today, only because I have not presented this in an audience where I wasn't trying to persuade people to really go into nursing education or going into being an educator. So I'm really going to be providing some insight on some statistics and some pitfalls that we have currently on faculty shortages. So last year really transcended to me that we needed more diversity across the board, but specifically because I am a nurse educator, that was really my focus. So I actually began doing some literature review last year, and it started as me doing a blog post and then later writing an abstract on minority faculty shortages in nursing. So I'm going to read to you my abstract that I have done a few presentations on over the last year. But because of the audience being general, I decided to flip it to more general statistics on faculty of color and where we, in every profession, can improve the practices of inclusion and then diversity. So my abstract title, Minority Professor Shortages, was related to nursing practice. Teaching in the field of nursing is a rewarding experience and an opportunity to give back to nursing. Education in the faculty role allows for providing insight into current practices based on lived experience and the present evidence-based guidelines. Overall, Caucasians and Asians are overrepresented in nursing in comparison to African American and Hispanic nurses. As a result of this disparity, there are also problems with equal representation of minority nurse faculty. Those considered faculty of color have continued to represent less than 13% of nursing faculty. As a nurse educator, I have a direct impact on one's future practice when caring for patients. I am concerned about these known truths and have a few questions to consider. Why is there not an equal representation of minority faculty when compared to the majority? Are individuals not given a fair chance, or is there implicit bias associated? It is a tedious process to complete applications for faculty roles and often discouraging to obtain feedback from an automated email generated message about qualifications not matching. I encourage all minority potential faculty candidates to increase their visibility in becoming part of nursing faculty to continue to be persistent. There does need to be interest in nursing research to be considered competitive for some positions. There are overwhelming amounts of candidates with clinical experience as registered nurses or nurse practitioners who would be excellent faculty members. Students more than ever need to see someone who looks like them at some point in their curriculum who identify with being a person of color. This is important in ensuring self-efficacy is present throughout their program. Often the hiring process is screened by human resources and not specific to nursing departments. Specific to nursing may be the change of having administrative involvement with applications submitted for faculty roles would improve the diversity in nursing faculty. Anyone who knows me both personally and professionally understands my passion for nursing education. I have convinced to date a majority of my friends to go back to school to provide their insight into teaching others who are in nursing. As an African American female, I disproportionately represent a minority faculty. I am grateful for my opportunities. However, we have so much work to do in the recruitment and retention of minority nurse faculty. Colleges and universities must consider diversity within the workplace, particularly for nursing. This is an initiative from the American Association of College of Nursing, AACN. Their initiative involves the inclusion of diversity of both students and faculty in schools of nursing across the country. An inclusive learning environment can be shaped by the active recruitment of minority faculty. Should there be more representation of diversity in the hiring process, such as within a search committee? This endorsement by AACN is a step in the right direction in the solution to improving a diverse workplace and learning environment for students. Recognition is the first step in making strides to consider those who are minorities from diverse backgrounds. So I'm happy to be here today to just give you some insight on some of the statistics as it relates to those who identify as a person of color. We are still underrepresented in faculty roles. There have been many hypotheses about this, just looking at the research involved with this. And some of it is related to just not having the motivation, or maybe not have identified with a person of color in a faculty role while they were in the role of a student. And so this is also a consideration for us to try to promote more faculty that are in more of diverse backgrounds. So really just having a more inclusive environment would help to narrow down these numbers. But it is something that we have to have the conversation about and bring it forward. A new study from the Hispanic Journal of Law and Policy found that there has been little growth in the number of college faculty members of color. The aforementioned study examined doctoral status institutions between 2013 and 2017, found that the number of Hispanic and Latino faculty members grew by less than 1%, and the number of Black faculty members grew by only about 0.1%. So those numbers are still very alarming, and I just think that this is something that all of us can help to try to promote, encouraging students also later going into faculty positions. So recruitment methods that we can do in the future and try to work on would be being intentional about having a more diverse environment, making some changes to our previous hiring practices, because change happens really from a full circle perspective. Considering a person of color to be on search committees. Ensuring that we have an inclusive environment for persons of color in university leadership. And once we hire those of color, ensuring that they have a comfortable environment, making sure that the mentorship is there, especially for those who may not have as much experience. Because not only do we want to hire those of color, but we want to retain them in our staff. Cultural competency should also be considered. And maybe now we can have diversity statements included in the applications for hire for all faculty members. And this is really a phenomenon that's being seen across the board. So student considerations, there has been research that has shown that students of color do identify well with those who look like them. Self-efficacy, or their confidence to believe that the role that they're going into and that they will be successful at it, is highly sought by seeing someone who looks like them in a faculty role. And it may also lead them later to wanting to become a faculty member. So overall, we have to have diversity for our students to be able to identify with, and for all students to gain perspective on diverse populations. So in summary, Let's normalize inclusive environments with hiring practices and respect for all. Let's normalize all students being able to identify with at least one faculty within their selected major. Let's normalize consideration of those with color for faculty positions posted. And let's normalize that those of diverse backgrounds have the competence to do equal work of the majority race. And I appreciate you all listening to what I have to say. I appreciate the introduction as well, but I will also share some other ways that I have been getting involved with my community and in academia. I was just asked to co-author a book that will be titled Intersection of Social Justice and Nursing. And I'm also a member of the National Organization of the Nurse Practitioner Faculty Diversity Committee. And I am on the research committee for DNPs of color. So I hope that there will be a promotion of more faculty of color going into specifically nursing education. And also I hope to help to promote publication of the works by those who identify as being a person of color. I will now take some questions. Thank you for your time.
Excuse me, Dr. Lowery. I'll get it out in a minute. Dr. Lowery, this is Hal Langford. I'm on the faculty of the College of Business here at LSUA. And as I look around the room, despite my boyish appearance, I am certainly the oldest person in the room. Secondly, I also suspect that I am the only one who grew up truly in the segregated South. I did not have African classmates in high school until I was a junior. I hope has not diminished my capacity to understand the problems associated with being minority faculty members. I also have been a dean, and one of my greatest challenges, as I know that we have here, is hiring minority faculty. Let me just give an example. I was a dean at a mid-sized university. We couldn't compete salary-wise to attract faculty of color or Hispanic faculty because our state university, our budgets were limited. And I will give just this one example. I had a graduate student, a young man who I had mentored, an African fellow, and he went on to get his doctorate at the University of Indiana. His package between tuition and his teaching stipend and all of those things amounted to $55,000 a year as a graduate student. At the time that he went to the University of Indiana, I wasn't paying any faculty member in my department $55,000 a year. So I certainly, I asked him if he'd come back to work for me when he graduated, and he said, Hal, you can't afford me. And he was right. I couldn't afford it. So there's this problem that we have to get around somehow to find a way to hire, maybe even to the point of figuring out ways to share minority faculty members across campuses. The faculty members that we have on this campus who are minority faculty are just fabulous and wonderful people. But most of them are here because there's some attachment to the community. Quite frankly, it's hard to convince somebody of any ethnicity to make the decision sometimes to move to Alexandria, Louisiana. it's always difficult in that regard. So what ideas do you have for us figuring out ways to close this gap so that we can indeed find minority faculty members to come to Alexandria, Louisiana, and teach at a great institution like LSUA?
Thank you for your question. And definitely, I know that it is not considered a major city, so that does present a challenge. And financial implication is a challenge, as you mentioned, for everyone as well. I think that as we continue to move forward with technology, I think we'll see that we'll have more virtual and online or more hybrid courses that will provide more of that opportunity to see persons of color in faculty roles. But you're right, the idea that maybe sharing faculty across universities or across the same university, that has varied within one umbrella, like LSU, for instance, we may be able to, add to the representation. But you're right, those are challenges that make it difficult. And as I went through some of the literature, there have been some suggestions about having some loan repayment for educators with a background of colors to try to offset the cost of the education, and so that they could go into the faculty roles. But that is the challenge, I think, really, from an age perspective too. Education, for some, the initial thought is to do it towards the end of a career and not at the height. So we see the same challenges in nursing. It's hard to get younger faculty involved. Most of them want to remain clinical until they are at the end, if you will.
We still have time for additional questions.
I have one more comment, one more question. In my effort to diversify my faculty, when I was in Texas, I attempted to do just what you suggested by hiring online faculty. And interestingly enough, I had contacts in Africa and was able to hire, I would have been able to hire American educated, doctorally qualified faculty members living in Africa for the same or even less than I was paying my faculty who live in Texas. The problem was I could not convince either my administration or the great state of Texas that I should outsource faculty members. But I think you have hit on the key there, and that is providing opportunities for people. We provide opportunities for people to go to school wherever they happen to be. They're in California, why can't we provide faculty the opportunities to live wherever they want to live and teach for us? And I think as we move towards that model, then we will begin to slowly see the diversity mix change. So I support that concept.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Dr. Rowan has a question.
Hi, Yvette, John Rowan, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. Good to see you again.
Good to see.
Yeah, couple of things. I mean, I want to agree with my friend and colleague, Dr. Hal Langford, on a couple of things. First, I agree, he really is the oldest in the room. The side but what you did, Yvette, was you in your work, you hit on the core pillars of what research is, and I want to connect that to what Hal said in a second. You observe, analyze, and recommend. So you observe this discrepancy in terms of minority faculty who were employed at universities. You analyze what's going on, and then on the basis of that, made some recommendations about how we could take steps to fix this, or at least start addressing that, which is excellent. But another thing that research always does is generate more questions, new lines of inquiry. And I think that's what Hal was getting at. For example, one of the reasons it's so hard to successfully recruit and then retain faculty, minority faculty members, is because there are too few of them who have the opportunity to become educated and pursue these kinds of positions. And the new level of inquiry is, what can we do? And I'm not expecting anyone to know this, because I don't think anyone's figured it out, but what can we do to lessen the degree of socioeconomic disparity that is built into our system? I mean, there are discrepancies about levels of education, about healthcare, and other things that just make it the case, unfortunately, that we're going to keep seeing these discrepancies until we get at sort of a higher level of a solution. Because it's not just faculty, it's the legal profession, it's medical profession, it's other things that require these kinds of, again, these higher levels of education. So I was interested to hear about your work and the intersection of social justice and nursing. Do you plan on looking at any of these, again, sort of higher level social approaches that could perhaps mitigate some of the problems I'm talking about?
Yes, so the chapter that I'm going to actually be helping with is related to nursing curriculum and the development of nurse faculty. But the other portions of the book will be addressing social determinants of health. So healthy people, 2030, goodness. I remember when we were at 2010, I feel old now. And then it's also going to address just diversity, not even just those of color, but also ageism and LGBTQ matters. So it's going to be a really great book, and it's just going to be full of a variety of authors from different places and diverse backgrounds. So there really is not a text out there like this book. So I'm really excited.
We are looking forward to seeing it. So thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Lowery, I have one question. Sorry, I can't type it in. You had mentioned how students they connect to faculty of their ethnic background. How would you recommend for other faculty to encourage those minority students to enter into the education sector? How can we connect with them?
For all students, I try to be very encouraging. Some of them will come to me and ask, just recommendations on what they should do in the future. And I know for our program specifically, many of our students are looking at graduate studies. And sometimes before I even interact with them, they see my bio and then they see my picture, and I will get automatic comments of, wow, you've done so much, you look young. And so I think some of them, just seeing who I am, they're automatically like, okay, I could do it too if she has done these things. So I think just having some diversity is really the first step. But I know there has been some programs that have mentorship where students of color have faculty that they are assigned to kind of connect to, just to make sure that they have their special needs met, if they have any that they want to, connect with to the faculty. For instance, if someone is going through living in a more poverty environment. I know our students are already registered nurses. However, their family members may not be. They still may live in the community that they were raised in. So especially because of the cost of schooling. So there are still some special needs even for our post-licensure nursing students.
Let me pause here for just a moment and turn your attention to the time. I know some of you are going to be presenting at 1:30 and you may have to walk across campus. So let me please give you permission if you need to get up and change rooms to get your presentation ready. Feel free to do that. It looks like we still have some good conversation left. So this certainly isn't the end. Are there any students that have any questions for Dr. Lowery? Okay. How did I hear you had an additional question?
Oh, I can talk all day long. Dr. Lowery, at the risk of sounding like another old white guy, Bernie Sanders, what do you think about the idea of providing at least junior college education for free to all who qualify? To close the social economic gap.
I would say, just to be honest, I'm somewhat torn because I was someone that was I was an LPN at 18, and so I didn't qualify for any free money, and I know a lot of people that did, and they didn't finish school. So I think that there maybe should be a reward factor once there's a completion. Because giving the money up front may not always mean that they're going to complete what they started. And that's all people. That doesn't even have anything to do with race, gender, or, how someone identifies as themselves. But I think maybe afterwards, that could be a consideration.
You and I need to talk in some way sometime. I think you and I have a lot in common. Thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Lowery one more time for spending time with us today. Enjoy the rest of Scholar Day. I look forward to seeing you all tonight, this evening, and this afternoon at the award ceremony and celebrating with those of you that get awards.